is Don't Get Me Started. This is a conversation about advertising. And here is your host, freelance creative director and creative circus department head, Dan Balser.
Wow, first off, thank you for agreeing to talk to me again. And I don't remember which one of these conversations, so this is your fourth time. And
Is it really?
I had to go back and figure out exactly how long ago it was. So episode 12 was in 2007. You were a creature.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 128 was 2012, and you were Zaz.
Yep.
Okay, you're smiling. Episode 216 was in 2015, 5 years ago at Possible.
Yep.
And then we completely skipped the whole Wonderman Thompson chapter where you were EVP, ECD. You were too busy, I guess, for this at that point.
Maybe.
And then now, episode 329, 2020, you're at Uber, Global ECD. Wow, and thanks. And it is, before we started recording, listeners, you have to know, I'm seeing Danielle's face like live for the first time in a long time. She's looking great. It's great to see her face on my computer. Listeners, thank you for listening to these conversations that we're recording this in this sort of like new old way of doing remotely. And before we really start the conversation, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure Danielle remembers this. I probably told the story on the podcast that one of these early episodes, and I'm going to say it's probably Creature, we did a 35-minute conversation. It was really, really good. I mean, we hit some meaty stuff and we recorded it. That was back when you could record directly into GarageBand through iChat voice.
Yep.
And at the very end of it, I went to save it and the entire file crashed. And the reason I tell the story, I think will kind of be, it highlights, Danielle, your DNA, because I don't know a lot of people who would have done this. So we get to the end of this and I'm sitting here, I'm saying, oh shit, Danielle, it's like, I've got the ball of death. It looks to me like this. And I force quit it and there was no file saved. And so you said at that moment, okay, let's do it again. Let's go again. And I don't know anybody who would have been like, that's cool. Let's just do it over again. And the challenge for me at that point was that I didn't remember like 20 minutes into the second conversation, what we had talked about earlier in that conversation or was in the first one. But this time I have confidence in Google that this conversation will be recorded. And how's it going? Like you're in your house, you're in your bed. We're all in our own bedrooms or our own houses. Talk to me about starting a job that you haven't been to. Talk to me about balancing family downstairs. This moment when one of them could walk in, who knows? Talk to me about how things are. What's the temperature of things in the Hawley house right now?
In the Hawley house, they're pretty good. You know, we're super lucky that we've had the same nanny for 10 years. And I don't know that there's anybody that can really say that. So we make no mistake. We are very aware at how lucky that situation is. So the second that we quarantined, it was like, we're just going to quarantine with our nanny and her boyfriend as well. Right. So the kids haven't necessarily really felt much of a difference in that it sort of feels like a bit of a perpetual summer. Right. She's handling all the remote learning. She handled all that stuff. So, you know, as far as Steve and I go, we're good to do our jobs and it's pretty maintained. Now our kids are pretty much feral in the basement from like 6:30 in the morning to like 10 o'clock when the nanny comes, but they're fine. They're old enough now to where they can like pour their own cereal and chill. And every now and again, there's like a naked child in the picture, but no one seems to mind.
Feral is hilarious. What a hilarious way to put that. And I also like you don't even have on top skills on LinkedIn, just FYI, copywriting. Like you're a writer and you put top skills, creative direction, strategy for sure, and art direction. But art directors don't. We have to probably define feral for the art directors that are listening. Sorry, that's art directors.
They're wild and often naked and slightly scary.
Yeah, we have a different challenge because I have a 15 and a 20-year-old in the house. The 20-year-old is like over it, like miserable. The 15-year-old wants to sleep till 1 and play video games all day, but he's an athlete and we want him to work out. He doesn't want to work out. He doesn't want. So we're all dealing with our own challenges. So I want to know. I hit at the very top of this: Creature, Zaz, Possible, Wonderman Thompson, and now Uber. Like how the career has changed, how the job has changed. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like this has been seamless promotions, seamless moves, or have there been moments where you're like, holy crap, this is like closer to 90 degrees than I thought it was going to be?
It's been like, I think in hindsight, it makes so much sense to me. I don't think I would have said that going through it, but in hindsight, it is so, it just makes sense. Creature was, I think, the perfect place for me and Miranda Gerlach, who you know well, as a team to go to for our first real job. We did a stint in Denver. In fact, when I was talking to Joe today, he was like, "No, you moved to Denver. You moved to Denver. You didn't live in Seattle." We were only in Denver for about 9 months, and our creative director at the time that we had really gone to work for in Denver quit, and we put our book out and thought it was going to take us forever to find a job. We were in Seattle 2 weeks later.
Right, great.
And Creature was so tiny, and I think we were employee numbers 11 and 12. And so for us, if you remember the kind of students we were, I was also an older student leaving the circus. It was baptism into fire. It was wear as many hats as you can. You have to be a strategist one day. You got to run the studio the other day. So even though we were what was essentially a pretty junior team, we got a crap load of responsibility right out of the gates.
Well, that suits you. That suits you well. How old were you when you graduated?
You always ask me these questions about like what year I graduated and how old I was.
I don't know what year.
I don't know. I think I was probably about 28.
No, that's what the reference point I was trying to get to is because I have this conversation with a lot of students about what makes the ideal student. And I started ad school at 26, graduated at 28. And I just think that life perspective makes you much more focused and professional. But okay, so back to your story, back to Creature. So yes, you were thrown into a lot of different responsibilities, which suits you.
Yes. Client facing, the whole thing. In fact, I really feel like I learned everything that I need to do the job I do today there.
Wow.
Which I am incredibly grateful for. But it was also a crash course in the kind of culture that I wanted to be around, the kind of way I wanted to work, the kinds of people I wanted to work around. And I met my husband there. So I'm incredibly grateful for that experience. But I left pretty downtrodden. I was burnt out. I didn't think I was good at this. I thought that there was no way that the advertising world was for me. It was a very low moment. And then I met the founder.
Why? Why? What happened? Like,
it was just, it was probably classic burnout, but it was also, as Creature grew, we started taking on more of the typical type of junior team that you would hire, which at that time added up to like the funny guys.
Oh, okay.
And all of a sudden we were the responsible ones, and we were the ones that got the work that, needed to just get done. And it was a boys club. And that's not I don't mean that as a derogatory description of anybody that was there or leading. All I mean is that the culture and the environment didn't feel right to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left, I was like, I'm going to go to cooking school. This isn't right for me. I'm clearly not a good enough writer, clearly not good at leading. The soft skills that I had didn't seem to add up to the value that I felt like I could bring to an agency environment. And then I met Shane Atchison, who was the founder of Zaz. Of course, Zaz transitioned to Possible, which transitioned to Wunderman Thompson. So effectively, I was at the same agency for 11 years.
Yeah.
It just merged and changed and felt like very different agencies all within the same 11-year stint.
What changed? When those things changed, did things change?
Oh, yes, of course. So much. It was really the only reason I stayed was because they were different jobs.
Right.
Not just in my own level of responsibility, but because they were different agencies. But when I met Shane Atchison, I was really just honest about I don't want to work in this kind of environment. I don't want to work in this kind of environment. This is the kind of work I want to do. I want more leadership. I want this. I want that. I was slightly obnoxious and young, and I think my age showed. But I also had a huge sense of urgency and I think a level of desire to change things. And at that time, traditional agencies were nowhere near, I thought, the potential that digital agencies had. They were great at brand platform thinking. They were great at brand ideas and anthemic TV spots. But I thought that there was that sort of media agnostic approach that I had learned in Creature. All I had to do was learn the channels in digital. And I felt like I had a massive amount of value to bring to that table. And I knew that the digital agencies could become more conceptual, and the traditional agencies were going to have a really hard time pivoting to become more digital.
Right.
So I went in that direction, and not only loved the kind of work and the kind of thinking and the technology that paired with creativity, that I would grow to be very much the foundation of the way that I think about ideas. It was also the kind of culture that I wanted. And I thought, if the foundation in terms of the culture is here, I'll just build a great team. And I did. And Zaz turned into Possible, and Possible then grew from being, Zaz was like 250, Possible was like 1,250 overnight and global.
God.
And after I had one kid, and then after I had my second child, I came back from maternity leave, went to an offsite, and Shane was like, I need you to run North America. So then all of a sudden I had a whole new role where I was like, oh, I have 5 different teams, different cities. This is going to be fascinating. And this is when I started to really get into, okay, it's not just about my lieutenant as the ECD in these different offices. It's also about making relationships with the managing director of each of those offices and the HR team in each of those offices. And this is when I started to get a real understanding of the business and how important relationship building was to make space to do good work. And then running the team was really about the work itself. And those two things are not inextricably linked, as you know.
Wow. So how do you describe your job? Like, how do you describe what your job went from being a creative to being a creative leader to being a corporate or sort of a company leader? Like, how do you approach what your job is when you wake up in the morning? And even now, let's just go directly to Uber. How do you define what your day-to-day is?
It's funny because 50% of my job is working with the agencies. So Colleen DeCourcy, Susan Hoffman at Wieden & Kennedy. We work with the Anomaly team. We work with Mother in London. We work with Special Group in Australia. And someone asked me, actually, it was Doug Zanger, who's a journalist who you may know, was like, what does an ECD on the brand side do? And I said, I don't have any idea. I honestly don't have any idea. But I don't know that there have been isolated cases, I think, where people have been really successful doing it. And then there's been a lot of people who have just sort of disappeared off the face of the earth because I don't know whether the corporate nature of the organizations that they joined swallowed them or what. But I kind of want to do it a new way. And I'm not 100% sure what that is yet, but I'm defining it every day that I wake up.
So are you like the brand steward or sort of the brand anchor to basically keep work from all the agencies saying the same thing or being on the same page? Or do you feel like you're heading an internal agency, or is it a combination of those things? And when it comes down to the actual kinds of projects that are done, what are the projects that are done for a brand like Uber, and who does them? Yeah. That's a lot of questions. Sorry.
That's okay. It is a combination of the two. I would say that we are building the ethos of the Uber brand probably in conjunction with Wieden & Kennedy. I think we've found a real consistent North Star in the idea that Uber is a movement company. But what's been fascinating about COVID is that we haven't necessarily changed our ethos, but the culture and the way that we go to market has changed significantly in the Dara era of our CEO rather than the Travis era, which is what everybody knows as Uber 1.0, which was an evil, potentially difficult organization that sort of asked forgiveness instead of really joining communities and cities and building things together. Where Dara is a whole new kind of an executive and is an immigrant and has had an amazing upbringing and really wants to change Uber to be a brand that does good. So when you think about movement, all of a sudden
now it moves food.
We move food. We move a lot of things. In fact, you can get your jeans delivered in 2 hours if Levi's is an Uber Direct partner. I mean, there's all kinds of the way that we operationally pivot at a place like Uber to create new products where there's demand is insane. I've never seen anything like it. It's fascinating. But what I get excited about is the idea of movement has a clear enemy, and through no fault of our own, you never want to waste a crisis, but people can't move right now. And they can't move from COVID. They can't move because our country is going up in flames, and the racial injustice that's happening is insane. And God forbid that people should not have the right to move freely without fear. So there are places where we can dig in and I think credibly have a voice in the conversation in ways that we otherwise have not been successful doing. So to answer your question about being the brand steward, 100%.
Are you excited about what you just talked about? Social justice, I think, is really, really important. Do you feel like you have given a gift to be able to formulate or at least affect some messaging that way or some visioning that way? I mean, do you feel like you've been bestowed almost a responsibility? How do you settle with that from the corporate side and for a brand like that when it comes to like the bigger questions of our society and our country? Or do you not?
I mean, I recognize my privilege as much as I possibly can, but also recognize that I know nothing and that I'm learning every day as an individual, as well as a leader at a company like Uber. I think that one of the great things about what I'm seeing out of the executive leadership team at Uber is that we do feel like we have a part to play in the conversation, because at the end of the day, when you get in an Uber, it is an unwritten contract between two people getting in a car.
Right.
And the trust that has to exist between those two people is really unrelated to the company or the brand. It's really just comes down to two people. And we have a role to play in ensuring that the values that we talk about in the world show up in that car between those two people who are trusting one another.
Really
but
interesting.
we have to have substance behind the sizzle. So, it doesn't make sense to go to market with some sort of a campaign or some sort of even an advocacy program unless we get our house in order. So, Dara just wrote a piece and came out with the fact that Uber is committed to being an anti-racist company. So there's commitments that go along with that. And I think that's the first step, is not just making the commitments because it's what everybody's expecting in this climate, but really committing to it and showing that long-term sustainability to the effort and shows sustained change as it relates to those actions. Then you can go ahead and talk about it in comms. But first, you got to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and that that inside the box is marrying with what you're ultimately telling people is happening.
Is really, really, really important. And, every time I have these conversations with anyone about it, it always comes back to that. It's like, is this opportunistic and empty, or is this grounded in some sort of truth of the company's mission and the company's policy? So it's really interesting to hear that. Going back to the in-house question, the more simple stuff. Because I teach at an advertising school that you attended once upon a time. What are the jobs at a place like Uber?
In the creative department or
Yep.
in general? Same as they are in an agency. I think the evolution of the department has gone through its own stages. I mean, I think that at one time there was much more of a brand studio. Then there was a lot more creation of assets that were happening with more of a full-scale program of people who do that work. But there are designers, there are production people, there are motion graphics, there are ops people in the creative department, there are art directors and copywriters. But I think the difference is that there are, a design group at an agency was really about making campaigns look better. And a design group within the creative team that I run is about brand system architecture, is about iconography, is about online and offline, is more of, the stuff that our pal Ron Moore would teach in his class.
Yeah, we did I did an episode of this podcast with Catherine Ray. She was a designer at Uber who worked on the last pattern background look and feel. I should know the episode number. I don't know, but I did get the sense, the things you were just talking about, it's more of the systems and icons and stuff like that. I didn't realize you had art directors and copywriters, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah. What happens, is like, there's two things that I see is really interesting opportunities as I'm in my 4th month of being client side and have already said things that I wish that I had never said, that I wish that clients had never said to me as an agency person. I'm now totally saying, but first of all, agencies are dumb. Like, I can tell you the amount that I've learned in 4 months of just like the mistakes that agencies make are, it's amazing. But then also,
what kind of mistakes? Like, what are you talking about?
Well, I mean, I think that there's this idea of being one meeting ahead, being super buttoned up, that that a lot of agencies aren't. Even the ones that you would think aren't. And so it's like when a client asks you for something that feels small, it isn't small. It's never small. You need to come up having thought 2 meetings ahead from what that client asked, because we're running so fast on our side to keep up with the day-to-day business that 15 minutes that we had to brief you really quickly on something that we're thinking about means if you can get out 2 steps ahead from it, you're in a great place. But if you show up to sort of like have a loose discussion and haven't really done any preparation on it or have something for us to react to, it's dead in the water and we're going to move on, especially at tech companies, because it's all about throwing something against the wall, seeing what sticks and going like full pace at it. And if there's nothing to throw up against the wall, the conversation's over.
Did they not understand the problem, or they didn't understand the expectation? That's a rhetorical question. I'm not sure there's an answer to it.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of, well, you didn't set the right expectations. And I think agencies get in their own way. It's like the agencies that struggle to me are the ones that are always trying to guess what's in our heads,
right,
rather than coming with a clear point of view. And the truth is because we might have a point of view, but we're more interested in knowing what yours is. And you'd be surprised how many agencies really struggle to do that and get caught up and trip on themselves trying to figure out what it is that's in our heads, rather than just being really bold and smart and talking to us about what they think we should do.
You had to years ago, like, oh, that she's going to like this or she's not going to like this. I mean, there's a lot of that sort of, that's the conversation that happens in agencies. Had a really interesting, fascinating conversation with a guy called Paul Charney down in San Francisco. Has a place called Funworks. And the way that they create their creative executions and ideas is they bring a team from the client, a team from the agency, and then a group of improv actors to keep the stuff moving. And they
Smart.
it's basically like laughing but they stay on track to try to solve the creative problem, but they are unfiltered and they are trying to be funny. And they have a professional doing a graphic representation of the meeting. Instead of notes, they do it graphically with like cartoons and this happened. And those are the meeting notes. So there's no guessing what the client went. The client's part of the conversation. The creatives are part of it because they can bring their own sort of sauce to it. But it takes out, that's a solution to not trying to guess what the client wants. It's really interesting.
A good one. It's definitely an interesting model.
It's a very interesting setup. So a whole different question for you. So you are the third. Do you want to go back to any of that? Are we good with that last part?
No, I mean, I don't remember. I don't remember what the original.
Well, you were talking about mistakes. You were talking about mistakes that agencies make, and second guessing what the client needs, rather than solving the problem and bringing back a solution that they have somehow brought their talent and their vision to solving your problem their way. That's what you want.
Didn't you ask me something before that was about the way that we're organized internally or what work we do or something? I don't remember.
Yeah, one of the questions was, what are the things that are made and who makes them?
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so, this is another gap that I'm seeing is like, there's agencies that are really good at coming up with brand platforms and anthemic kind of thinking. But there is this upper funnel, mid funnel that isn't necessarily like when you get into CRM and email and sort of like bespoke lower funnel activity. There's this like middle and upper funnel stuff.
Okay, explain that in student level terms, what that means.
Activations, stunts, digital first thinking, innovation, taking a platform partner like a Twitter and turning it on its head, or doing something that is never been done. I would call it like the Titanium Group at Cannes. Like
it's tech hacking in a way.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think it's changing the landscape for the better. I think I'm constantly saying, "Where's my Whopper detour?" Like I want my Whopper detour. And that brief came from someone saying we need to drive more digital engagement in the app for mobile orders, and they turned that brief into something pretty spectacular. So I think there's that gap. Ultimately, that's what I would like my team to do, is to fill that gap and to be really thinking about, we're so close to the product. We're so close to design. We're so close to engineering. No matter what, an agency is always going to be one step removed for that. So long
In a
term,
good way, right? In a good way.
yeah.
Yeah.
In a great way, we're close to what we need to be close to.
No,
And
you're saying the agencies are one step away. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
it's a good thing because they give us perspective. It's a bad thing because they can't innovate as quickly.
Okay.
Because they're just not as interlaced into the inner workings of the way that the work moves through the organization.
Right.
So ultimately, that's kind of how I like that thinking. I mean, it goes back to my creature roots. I like launching products with clients. I like rethinking things like that. I think the way that we can not only influence the way that the brand looks and feels, but like the way the organization behaves is the kind of team that I want to build.
Do you feel like you're empowered to do what you want to do?
Heck, yes, definitely. I wouldn't have taken the job if I wasn't.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So another question.
Yeah.
So you're the third guest on the show who was a Division I soccer player.
Really?
All women, because in the United States, the soccer players are women.
Yeah.
Yes. Skate Knopfsinger, Wake Forest, and Kate Parker, also Wake Forest. And I have an athlete, a soccer player. How do you think team sports affected you as a professional or as a person in your life, or do you accredit any of the way you approach anything to the fact that you played high level elite team sports?
I credit everything to having played team sports. Everything in my life, not just professionally, but personally. For starters, I mean, I grew up around pretty fierce, strong women from a very young age. And I don't think everybody has had that experience, especially in the 80s, right? All of my soccer teammates have grown up to be these like incredible forces of nature, because of the amount that you go through in your own personal struggle physically, but emotionally and mentally with the way that the game is run, especially when you play at a super high level. It is just as political as an organization. It is just as difficult to navigate as a professional career. And in fact, when you get to college, it is a career. It is a job. It is 100% the same. But also inner workings of a team, of realizing that you have to bring people along, even if you're the leader of the ship. Working with personalities you don't necessarily like, and being able to value what they bring to the table, regardless of the fact that they may not be your best friend. I think winning is super. I've said this a million times, but like, I love to win. Incredibly competitive. It's every fiber of my being. But I don't like to win alone. Like, it's really a lot of fun when you're winning with a bunch of people that you actually worked hard with to get to the win.
So advertising.
It is in a lot of ways.
Very much. So do you feel isolated in this situation, this current situation of sitting in your house? Have you been to work and met people? And how's the personal, I want to know how you're doing personally. The professional part seems to me like the pieces are clicking together incredible. I'm super happy for you. But personally, has this been a frustrating time for you? And how's that been going?
Yeah, I mean, I miss my team, I think how obsessed I am with SoulCycle. And I think the reasons I'm obsessed with SoulCycle are clear. Is because it's my team. It's the team that I've created in my adult life. And it's a bike, so I can perform at a very high level athletically without hurting myself, which I do every time I try to go for a run. And I think that environment of building each other up and competing with yourself in an environment where people are rooting for you is super important to me. I have an at-home bike. I'm on the bike 5 to 6 days a week. I still get out the anxiety that I need to flush out of my system as a very kinesthetic learner, but I miss team. I miss my people. I miss hugs. I miss high fives. I mean, as far as like, he's doing an air high five in case people wonder.
Yeah.
As far as building a team internally, professionally, though, that's hard too, because, for being in an agency for 11 years, they were my family. My kids laugh at me because they're like, "Oh, you mean your work friends?" Like, they don't realize that I have friends outside of work, because when you work this hard, you have to actually create interpersonal relationships with the people that you call your colleagues. And to go from a job that I knew everyone and frankly knew pretty much everything about the way that the agency worked, to go to an environment where I knew nothing and no one, and had not felt the vibe of the inner office, had not met anybody personally, was really, really difficult. And getting to know people over Zoom. And it's one thing to have relationships and then move to a Zoom relationships, but to be building net new relationships on Zoom is, at my first week, I had all these crazy notes that were like, Dan, bald, great beard, because I was like, how the hell am I supposed to remember all these people?
Yep. No, it's exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it's a whole other level of effort. And I miss the things like throw the work up on the walls. Let's just have a jam session, and walking by meetings and going, oh, I wonder what's happening in there. Like, you just don't get to feel the space the same way. And we're doing it, and everybody's been incredibly helpful and open and honest. I mean, there's a level of intimacy that you have really quickly when you're on Zoom, because again, as the aforementioned, here's my naked child, welcome to my bedroom. So you get to know somebody, and you get to know things about people that you probably never would have working with them via Zoom.
True.
But it's still just a fascinating social experiment.
It's a social experiment. The hardest part for me with new relationships is the nonverbal communication that you can't pick up on. Like, I don't know if you're like jiggling your foot right now or looking. One-on-one conversations is a little bit easier to create that intimacy because it's still like a private conversation. Our faces are kind of relatively close, but in a group, it's very difficult to know who's listening. And that I think is mentally just exhausting. So, I don't know if I've asked you.
Agree. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I would add that, like, there's something about the wall, like this virtual wall between you that is, it's just ever present.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, I'm trying to encourage students. I talked about this on the last episode of the podcast, to like just have the camera on with a new partner, and just like, even if you're not necessarily working, just have it on so that like an idea could come to you, you could just say it out loud, or you could read something funny and read it to them, just to try to recreate. And I think the biggest challenge, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the biggest challenge is that what we've done is we have tried to recreate things that happen in real life or whatever this way. So we're recreating it rather than creating it for this. And that's, for me as a teacher, it's like, we can't just take what we did in the classroom and then move it to this and think it's going to be the same. In some ways, it's automatically this way better. Like for our upper quarter classes, like grad class, when we're just looking at work, it works really, really well. But like when it comes to like presenting work or critiquing a whole class together, critiquing one person's work, there's got to be a better way to do it. And this just feels staid, and it feels so serious. Like it feels so like official. Like we're in our rectangles. We're at work now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that.
It doesn't feel organic.
No, it doesn't. And like, if I sit back from you now, it's like, I don't want you to think I'm not paying attention to you. It's like, I have to be here to let you know I'm really listening, but I'm listening. I don't know. They're just weird stuff.
It's funny because one of the weird things was people were like, they said, what's the most surprising thing we're going to learn about you when we meet you in person? And I said, I'm really short.
Yeah.
And none of them know that. And they were all floored, Dan. They were like, you have such a tall personality.
Yeah, well, you put the camera at chest height. It looks like you're looking up at some of your head. Your head is basically scraping the ceiling, in my view.
Right.
So yeah.
5'2".
Yeah, you and my wife, 5'2", play like you're 5'12".
That's the idea.
So I've probably asked you this, but what do you think it is about you? What trait has served you well so far? What do you think it is about you as a person and a creative and a leader that has served you best through your career?
I'm East Coast. I have often been known to rub people the wrong way. And over the years, I think that's the thing I've been working on the most, because I've seen it as being a value, because I'm willing to say the things that no one else will sort of go near. But I've learned to do it in a way that is leaderly and isn't so much about just being provocative. And there's a big difference.
Have you been empathetic, or is that a skill that you've learned over life?
It's exactly where I was going, is that I've always had it, but I haven't necessarily been able to communicate it or to have it resonate in my ability to deliver unpopular news. Because I think that's the mark of a leader, is that you can say things that aren't necessarily what everyone is hoping for, because sometimes there is not that answer, but you can do so with the ability to be incredibly empathetic for the impact that statement is going to have, but also have the balls to say the thing that everybody is dreading, and then follow it up with, like, I can't promise X, Y, and Z thing, but here's what I am going to do. And that is based in empathy, is considering, just like we do with our audience when we're advertising something, it's okay, what's the impact of that statement going to feel like to the audience that I'm giving it to? What are the questions that they're going to have? Anticipating those questions, making sure that I have a plan ahead of those questions, so that I don't get caught with just being like, well, I don't really know what's about to happen, because people need vision. And if you at least have thought through things to look like the semblance of a plan, you can calm people down in a way that makes the serious news or the unpopular news that you had to deliver a lot easier to take.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, are you talking about parenting? Is that what you're talking about?
Sure, exactly. It's all the same. It's all the same.
Hasn't it taught you some things?
Oh yeah. Although I'm much better at being a boss than I am at being a parent.
You'll know that probably in 40 years, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe we'll never know.
Maybe we never know. Thank you so much for talking.
You're welcome.
This has been great. Listeners, you can reach Danielle's generous enough to give out her electronic mail, Hawley, right?
Mm-hmm. Hawley at uber.com. Super easy.
Uber.com. Reach me as always at Dan's podcast at mac.com. Same email I've had forever. Thank you so much. It's just great catching up with you. I'm super excited for everything happening with your life. So thank you so much. And the listeners, thank you as well.
You're welcome. Say hi to everyone.
Okay, see you. Bye.